All right, let's set the scene. We're going back in time, way back, to around the year 1680. Somewhere in the bustling port city of Bristol, England, a baby boy named Edward Teach was born. We don't know much about his childhood, which is pretty common for folks from that era unless they were royalty. It's a historical cold case. But we can imagine young Edward watching the tall ships sail in and out of the harbor, their masts like a forest against the sky. He probably heard stories from sailors about far-off lands, hidden treasures, grand adventures on the high seas. These tales of daring and fortune must have planted a seed in his young mind, a desire for a life less ordinary. So how does a boy from Bristol become the world's most infamous pirate? It didn't happen overnight. The path to piracy often started with a perfectly legal job, being a privateer. During a conflict called the War of the Spanish Succession, England needed all the help it could get to fight its enemies on the ocean. So the government gave sailors like Edward Teach permission to attack and capture enemy ships. It was basically legalized piracy. Teach learned everything he needed to know during this time. How to sail a large vessel, how to fight with a sword and pistol, and how to lead a crew in the heat of battle. He was getting a masterclass in maritime warfare. When the war ended in 1713, thousands of sailors like Edward were suddenly out of a job. They had the skills, they had the ships, but they no longer had the Queen's permission to plunder. What were they to do? For many, the answer was simple. Keep doing what they were good at, but for themselves this time. Edward joined the crew of a famous pirate captain named Benjamin Hornigold, based in the pirate haven of Nassau in the Bahamas. It was here, in this rowdy, lawless paradise, that Edward Teach began to shed his old identity and forge a new one. He was no longer just a sailor. He was on his way to becoming a legend. This is where the transformation really begins. Under Hornigold's command, Teach quickly proved he was a natural leader and a fearsome fighter. He was smart, ambitious, and understood that in the world of piracy, reputation was everything. It wasn't enough to be tough. You had to look the part. He started crafting an image that would strike fear into the hearts of anyone who saw his ship on the horizon. He let his beard grow long and wild, braiding it into tight pigtails, sometimes even tying colorful ribbons into it. The man known as Edward Teach was fading away, and the terrifying figure of Blackbeard was about to be born. Every legendary captain needs a legendary ship. Blackbeard found his. He captured a massive French slave ship called La Concorde. This wasn't just any boat, it was a floating fortress. Blackbeard renamed it the Queen Anne's Revenge and immediately set to work upgrading it. He packed it with a staggering 40 cannons, far more than most Navy warships of the time. Imagine seeing that beast of a ship sailing towards you, its decks bristling with firepower. The Queen Anne's Revenge became his floating headquarters, the symbol of his power, and it allowed him to take on any target he chose, no matter how well defended. Now, let's talk about that famous flag. A pirate's flag, the Jolly Roger, was like a brand logo, and Blackbeard's was one of the scariest. His flag showed a skeleton holding a spear, pointing it at a bleeding heart. At the same time, the skeleton was holding an hourglass. The message was crystal clear: your time is up, and surrender is your only option to avoid a painful death. When sailors on a merchant ship saw that terrifying flag rising up the mast of the Queen Anne's Revenge, their courage often failed them. They knew they were facing the most feared pirate on the seven seas, and resistance seemed futile. Blackbeard's true genius was in psychological warfare. He understood that a reputation for being a monster was more powerful than any cannon. Before a battle, he would weave slow-burning fuses into his massive black beard and his hat. He'd light them as he went into combat, surrounding his head with a cloud of thick, acrid smoke. With his wild eyes and fiery, smoking beard, he looked like a demon straight from the underworld. He would storm onto the deck of a captured ship, pistols strapped across his chest, swords strapped across his chest, roaring at the terrified crew. Most crews surrendered without a single shot being fired. They were too scared to fight the devil himself. This fearsome image meant that Blackbeard's reign was surprisingly bloodless. He preferred to take ships without a fight, as it was better for business. Damaged goods and a wounded crew were bad for profits. His goal was to get the treasure, not to rack up a body count. He commanded a small fleet of pirate ships and hundreds of men, becoming the commodore of his own pirate flotilla. For about 2 years, Blackbeard and his crew were the undisputed kings of the Caribbean Sea and the American coastline, a terrifying and unstoppable force that haunted the world's busiest trade routes. One of Blackbeard's boldest moves came in May 1718. He didn't just attack a single ship, he decided to hold an entire city hostage. With his fleet of 4 ships, he sailed to the entrance of the harbor of Charlestown, now Charleston, South Carolina. He blocked any ship from coming in or going out. The city panicked as trade ground to a halt. Citizens were trapped, completely at the mercy of the most notorious pirate in the world. This was Blackbeard flexing his power on a grand scale. His demand wasn't for gold, jewels. Instead, he demanded a chest of medicine. His crew were likely suffering from syphilis, scurvy. He captured several prominent citizens from a ship trying to leave the harbor and held them for ransom. For nearly a week, he controlled the port. After tense days and some comical mishaps with his ransom party, the city officials gave in and delivered the medicine chest. Blackbeard released his prisoners and sailed away. After the blockade, Blackbeard sailed north to North Carolina. He ran his flagship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, aground in an inlet. Some historians call it an accident. Others see a plan to downsize his crew, get rid of men he didn't trust, keep a larger share of the loot. He struck a deal with Governor Charles Eden of North Carolina. Blackbeard received a royal pardon for his past crimes, promising to give up piracy. In return, the governor likely got a share of Blackbeard's stolen goods. For a short time, Blackbeard lived as a retired gentleman in the small town of Bath. The quiet life didn't suit him. He tried to be discreet. He used local connections to continue piracy on a smaller scale. He claimed the ships he captured were abandoned wrecks he'd salvaged. He got married, he bought a house, playing the part of a respectable citizen. But Virginia wasn't fooled. Governor Alexander Spotswood viewed Blackbeard as a major threat to trade and was determined to remove him for good, with or without North Carolina's help. Governor Spotswood decided to take matters into his own hands. He couldn't trust the authorities in North Carolina, so he organized a secret mission to hunt Blackbeard down. He hired 2 Royal Navy sloops, the Jane and the Ranger, and put a determined naval officer, Lieutenant Robert Maynard, in command. Maynard's crew weren't regular Navy sailors, but hand-picked fighting men, ready for a brutal showdown. In November 1718, they sailed south, secretly entering North Carolina's waters on a mission to find Blackbeard's hideout at Ocracoke Inlet. The final confrontation was drawing near. On the morning of November 22, 1718, Maynard's ships found Blackbeard's vessel, the Adventure, anchored in the inlet. Blackbeard and his small crew had been celebrating the night before, and were caught by surprise. The shallow waters of the inlet gave Blackbeard an initial advantage. His knowledge of the channels allowed him to maneuver, while Maynard's heavier ships ran aground. Blackbeard unleashed a devastating broadside of cannon fire, tearing through the deck of Maynard's sloop and taking out many of his men. For a moment, it looked like the legendary pirate would win yet again. But Lieutenant Maynard was a clever strategist. He ordered the rest of his men to hide below deck, making it look as though Blackbeard's cannon blast had finished them off. Seeing his enemy's ship apparently crippled and defenseless, Blackbeard made a fatal mistake. He and his men boarded Maynard's sloop, expecting an easy victory. Just as they swarmed onto the deck, Maynard and his hidden soldiers burst out from below and a desperate, bloody fight began. The deck of the ship became a chaotic scene of clashing swords, pistol shots, and shouting men. It was a fight to the death. In the middle of the chaos, Blackbeard and Maynard found each other and engaged in a legendary duel. They fired their pistols at each other at point-blank range. Maynard's shot hit the pirate, but Blackbeard seemed unstoppable. They drew their swords and fought fiercely.